Another City Skylines 2 developer diary just dropped, once again covering the Economy 2.0 patch. And it covers some of the most important aspects of the update, including the changes to the rent calculations and how your existing cities might be impacted by the patch. In addition, the diary discusses the improved building upgrade system, which will allow you to place, control, delete, and modify modular building additions much more freely than you could in the past. They also tease some new free assets, their plans for the Q3 patch, and the kinds of feedback they're hoping that you provide them to improve the game. So in this video, we'll go over these changes, I'll show you how they work, and I'll talk about my experience with the update. That said, please keep in mind that I'm working on a pre-release version of the game, so things may change between now and when the update is ultimately released. And if you're excited about the new Economy 2.0 patch, hit the like button and leave a comment letting me know how you feel. Or leave an emoji representing how you feel for the sake of engagement. And without any further ado, let's jump right in. The diary begins by discussing the changes to how rent works in City Skylines 2. The main goal appears to be to get rid of the high rent complaints by improving the underlying simulation. There are 3 primary changes that have been made. Number 1, they've removed the virtual landlord so that a building's upkeep is now paid equally by all renters. Number 2, they've changed the way that rent is calculated. And number 3, they've modified the reason the high rent icon is displayed and tied it directly to a household's income, while also changing the order in which households will spend money so that they'll prioritize their rent over resource consumption, all things equal. These sound like interesting changes, but lack appropriate information to contextualize them, so let's compare the information that was shared about a year ago in Dev Diary 4. Now in that Dev Diary, there was a description of how rents increase and how building levels increase as well. And it appears that in the original design for the game, residents would pool their leftover funds to level a building. And I can see a big problem here. Let's say you have one really rich household that moves into a multifamily building, and they have a ton of extra money left over at the end of the month. They would contribute all of their excess funds into the pot, causing the building to level, which could be a real problem if the rest of the building is filled with lower wealth residents. This could cause the high rent problems. Now on its face, it wouldn't appear that this new dynamic is much different than the old one, but I imagine that because all residents are contributing an equal amount of money into the pot, the maximum contribution would be equal to that of the lowest wealth resident. This would appear to slow down building leveling and control rents. That said, I am speculating a bit here. They don't fully explain this in the Dev Diary. That same Dev Diary from last year also explains that rents used to increase based on a mix of land value and demand. It begins by saying that if residents are happy living somewhere and wealthy enough, they'll be able to pay more rent, and that'll increase the area's land value. But then it also says that land value will only increase if residents and companies feel like their needs are being met and the area is valuable to their existence. And high demand for a specific zoning type can also increase the rent and thus the land value because more people want to move into your city than there are places to live. Now, bluntly, that first part is very strange, but the second part does make sense. But hindsight being 2020, the description almost sounds like reading a blueprint for a land value death spiral. Without a land value cap, which isn't described in this Dev Diary, land value would continue to increase forever if you don't continually zone. And if you stopped continually zoning, nobody would be able to afford the increased land values because it would continue to increase forever. To me, this sounds like the reason why single-family homes would eventually become unviable in many cities prior to the land value patch in March. And I would imagine that this new building leveling mechanic would fix the rest of the issues that we've seen. Switching gears to the new rental equation, it seems to make a lot of sense and seems similar to what you'd expect to see in the real world. Land value, zoning, building quality, aka level, size of a lot, and size of a structure are really the basic inputs that determine the value of a property, and that's exactly what's factored into this equation. The final change, modifications to household spending priorities coupled with a change in why high rent icons are displayed, is an interesting one. It sounds like residents will now prioritize rent over resource consumption, which is the opposite of how it was in the past. While it would make sense that your citizens prioritize rent over leisure, I do wonder where transportation factors into all of this. In many cases, transportation would be just as important, if not more important than rent, because without transportation to get to work, for instance, you couldn't have the job and then you couldn't pay your rent. Maybe I'm overthinking this. Let me know what you think in the comments. Now, as I mentioned in the previous video on the economy, the result of these changes ultimately means that most of my high rent complaints across my entire city have gone away. Next, the diary goes over building upgrades. For modular buildings, you're now able to move, delete, enable, and disable specific building upgrades. Further, you're able to place them within a radius of the main building rather than only directly attached to them. Some sub-buildings, such as the bus depot's extra garage or this clinic's extension, can be placed directly on a road. while others, like the elementary school playground, can be placed off a pedestrian path. And I have two primary thoughts here. First, these changes are awesome and they're going to be welcomed by basically everybody, but I can't help but feel that this is simply completing the modular building mechanic, regardless of what the dev diary says. I think we can all agree that this mechanic has been lackluster through this point and bordering on nonsensical for many assets. But even though we have an improvement, I can't help but feel that this mechanic is still missing some features that I hope are added in the future. For instance, if you have to place a sub-building on a road, you should be able to place a road while you're placing the sub-building. Similarly, it'd be nice to draw paths while adding sub-buildings as well. This isn't a new concept either. It's actually 100% how sub-buildings worked in SimCity 2013. Second, having some buildings work off pedestrian paths gives me hope that this feature will be implemented more broadly in the future. Many, including myself, have expressed frustration that parks require direct access to roads, and this really gives me a lot of hope that in the future this could change. Please, Colossal Order, let me place park assets off paths. It will completely change the way I design parks. Next, the diary explains how this update will impact your existing saves. They say that saves from before the economy rework will still work, though we expect that they will have a transition period as the simulation adapts to the changes. They also state that they make no guarantees about modded saves, explaining that mods that affect the simulation are likely to be affected. They then describe how your saves will be impacted and outline a number of things to look out for. When you first load up your save, government subsidies will be removed and city service upkeep is increased. So you should see that the cost of running your city is higher and that any surplus that you have in your budget will be reduced. Next, you'll notice that city service importing no longer happens by simply making a connection to the outside world. You're going to have to enable the Import City Services policy if you want to import city services. At the current time, this is an all or nothing proposition, so you can't choose to import just one or two services, though that appears to be on the roadmap in the future. Do know that you're likely going to have an issue with one or more services if you don't have this policy enabled, and you're going to have to troubleshoot things if you don't want to turn it on. Moving on to the demand bars, for a while they're likely going to bounce around. Production and employee numbers in particular will fluctuate for a while, and that'll lead to an overall increase in unemployment, and I will tell you from my experience, this is 100% the case. Finally, you're going to notice that high rent icons will almost entirely disappear. And if you're seeing them after a while, it's likely that you're experiencing high levels of unemployment throughout your community, so you'll want to zone some more workplaces. Now, here in Magnolia County, the rent icons disappeared in about 2 minutes. In Four Palms Bay, yes, it lives, the high rent indicators disappeared after about 1.5 minutes. Now, at that point in time, you'll probably look at the budget and think, holy cow, I've got a ton of money. But the reality is, you don't. You were likely importing a ton of city services, and those services were keeping your city afloat. So that gives you two options. You can either import city services, look what this does, or you can actually provide all the services that your city needs, which will eat up a significant chunk of that excess revenue you have. I will be releasing a video showing you how we drag Magnolia County into the new economy as soon as the patch is released. The diary concludes with discussions of where Colossal Order plans to go from here, and they mention a list of specific changes that they intend to make for the next update, which they say will come in Q3 after the summer break. These changes include giving more control over importing city services, improving the UI to provide more helpful information, and giving everyone some free city service buildings and vehicles. Now, interestingly, they say that these updates are already being worked on, and they've even provided a few screenshots of the new assets. In the first screenshot, we can see a water tower and what appears to be a smaller taxi depot with minivan taxis. In the second image, we can see a new waste treatment facility with new garbage trucks. Now, I've got to admit, the vehicles are news to me, but as I mentioned in the video discussing my meeting with Colossal Order, I was told that there are approximately 10 new city service buildings coming to the game, which includes a smaller train station. And it's great to get more information and see a couple of images. Throughout the last page, Colossal Order says that they're going to need our help. They want feedback from us to know how to make the game better for us, and I really appreciate that. There are many different types of players, and those different players are going to have different needs. You are going to have different needs, so I would highly encourage you to submit feedback, and I'll leave a link to where you can do so in the pinned comment. I think for me, I'm going to judge this patch based on the trajectory it puts the game in, and I think it's a better trajectory. This patch is not perfect. It's not going to make the game challenging enough for some people, and for others, they're still going to want more control. However, things are moving in the right direction, and this patch gives me hope that the game might become the game I hoped it would be. And with that, we have the final dev diary before the Economy 2.0 update drops. And while a specific date has not been provided just yet, I would imagine that the release occurs in the next week or two. And you better believe that I'll be excited to show you around as soon as it releases, both on stream and in a video. But for today, we're going to leave it here, and I really hope that you've enjoyed this one. If you did, please hit the like button. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. And I want to thank you for your time today. There's a million things that you could have been doing, and you decided to hang out with me and go over this dev diary, and I greatly appreciate that. I can't wait to see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.